There's been an awakening. Have you felt it? You are listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie McLean. Great Grand Rising, everyone. I'm glad that you're here today for another episode of Dark Matter Radio. We are starting a very, very, very interesting series, which is going to go into the aspects of human creation. We're calling this series Artificial Humans Walking Among Us. It goes hand in line with the book that I wrote, Artificial Humans. And, you know, it goes into how they were created, who are they about, and all that other type stuff. And it's very important that we go over this, especially in this era where you're beginning to start hearing a lot more things with ancient history, with a lot more texts and tablets and stuff like that being veiled. And a lot of it is being racially motivated, whether it's on the black side and mainly on what you would call the white side or the academic side, because a lot of the academics, even when they do know the truth, can't tell you the truth because they'll lose their jobs, you know. So we have to take in consideration, will the past become our future? You know, is this the destined of humankind to repeat the events that occurred on other planets, far away from Earth? And we're going to be taking a look at that, right? Dealing with a lot of the text from Zachariah Sitchin, dealing with the America, dealing with Nikazinza, and also what you would call Thoth and Hermes, through the America, and a lot of other ancient texts that we're going to be, you know, looking at, you know, because a lot of these stories, they chronicle the story of Earth, of humanity, and the original beings that were on the Earth, and those that may have come from other places. So it's important for us to pay attention to what's going on around us, because now it's time that we really find out how indigenous we really are. And I know that a lot of people don't want to delve into this because it's very, very, very dark matter. But we must go beyond the veil and look into who we were and who we are before the flood and some of these major catastrophes that have happened here on this so-called planet. So we must look at the creation story, which again is a very, very, very deep, deep, deep thing. And who was really made in the image of God? Who was really made in the image of God? Because now that we're coming into fruition, and when I say we, I mean a lot of the black people, a lot of the so-called black people, now calling themselves also indigenous people, or awakened people, enlightened people, bright race people, conscious people, are now in the process of calling themselves kings, queens, and gods. So if you or anyone in that diaspora is calling themselves a god, we have to look at that, because who was really made in the image of God? Who was really made in the image of God? Especially if you're calling yourself God. How then can you be created in his image? There's a strange paradox there, right? What are shades? Astral corpses, wooden being, without souls, you know? And what are hylics? And the other types of creations of so-called beings that were made that to operate here with just spirit energy. And are you one of them? So my research for who we are and the so-called black people of North America, even of Africa, has resulted in some very interesting information. Information you all need to know as you continue your journey in this so-called human condition, right? And you have to say human condition because anything that has a hue has some sort of a color to it. And, anything of color or anything of that is human, right? I mean, some people say we aren't human, right? So we have to really get into that. And that's why I say the human condition, because there's a lot more that goes in that meets the eye. Right, so I thank you all for joining me and others who will be appearing on the show or some of the other shows to talk this situation over and to really get into the relationship of all of this knowledge that is now coming out, especially in the field of metaphysics, in the Hermetica. Right, it's very important that we get a really good understanding of dealing with all of this quote-unquote stuff of spiritual, soulful nature. So it's time to really know why our people engaged into what is now called blood sacrifices. And even back then it was called blood sacrifice, right? And what did it really produce? And who was it really for, and how it interfered with the creation of mankind? And yes, there is a mankind, right? Humankind. Those were people that were made in God's image. And some people will say that that's Adam and Eve. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on with Adam and Eve, as well as a lot of stuff that goes on with the creation story, in itself. So there's a lot of things that we have to really take a look at. Now, when we take a look at Zecharia Sitchin, to hear an interview that was made with somebody who was going to do a book on Zecharia Sitchin's The Lost Book of Enki and some of the other Earth Chronicles type stuff, books that Zecharia Sitchin did. And the reason why he didn't really want other people doing it, and in this in this interview, you'll hear one of the really reasons why he said that. So it's important, for us to pay attention to these Earth Chronicles, right? And this is what I really call them, because a lot of them do chronological that's on Earth, right? So the first thing that I really want to lay down is that if you call yourself a king or a queen, you're already behind the 8 ball, all right? You're already behind the 8 ball, and they love it, or anybody would love it, that you call yourself a king and queen. When you're dealing in that aspect of things, you're dealing in an aspect of things that those entitlements or those titles do not apply to any quote unquote original indigenous being on this earth, or a being that is not of a creation model. So those were kings and queens were an after effect of when the gods left. And as they were preparing to leave the so-called earth, rise up above a lot of the other different types of things. So the last of the gods that were actually here were what you would call Hermes, Thoth, or Nigazinda, right? And we're going to get into that as well, because that's really important. This history goes back more than 440,000 years, and some people believe it actually goes back, 10 to 20 million years. Now, it sounds ridiculous, really, really ridiculous, but a lot of it, when you're hearing a lot of these things being talked about, you're hearing it being talked about by people who a lot of these things weren't really written for, right? Because you're talking about people who, for the most part, weren't even around when a lot of this things were actually happening. These Earth Chronicles provide humanity's side of the story, as recorded on the ancient clay tablets, other Sumerians and Sumatra, artifacts concerning the origins of the hands of what we now will call the Anunnaki, those who from heaven, earth coming from the sky. So anything that actually really came from the sky, or even came up from underneath the ground, all called gods. And then some of these people and beings put themselves in the status of gods by creating other entities, beings, lawfully or unlawfully. And what does lawfully, unlawfully means? That means universal law. There is a really serious universal law that is out there that all things have to abide by, right? Today, some people call it physics and all that other type of stuff, but these are unchanging laws that, when you really get into it, cannot be bent, right? You have to know how to work them. You have to know how to deal with them. You have to know what you're conjuring up and a lot of these other kinds of things, right? So concerning our origins at the hands of the so-called Anunnaki, from those who heaven, earth came, in the Lost Book of Enki, we can view this saga from a different perspective through the richly conceivably text of an autobiography account of the Lord Enki himself, an Anunnaki god, who tells a story of extraterrestrials arriving on Earth from the 12th planet, Narubu. Now, I'm using a lot of language that Zachariah Stitchin would use, right, in his book. We're going to get to that because Zachariah Stitchin, again, he had to hold back a lot of the information. But when you really begin to start reading a lot of these different books and all these different things in the Hermetica and a lot of the other ancient texts, on how some of these things came to fruition, when you begin to start reading through the lines, and that's what this is reading through the lines, you begin to start understanding that there's a whole nother story that is not being told. You know, all the robbing that went on in Kem or Kemet was done purposely, so then that way certain people would not know the real history, and they can hide it from the context of that, of where people are, not only in the physical sense, but especially in the spiritual sense and in the soulful sense, which is very, very, very important. Because you need to know the difference between the spiritual sense and the soulful sense, because everything is run or animated through spirit. So a cat has a spirit, a dog has a spirit, but not everything has a soul. But your soul is so powerful that your soul holds programming in it that will engage the spirit and animate it as well and give it power. So there's a few laws of that physics that go around where the spirit and soul, they combine and they connect. And when it connects, the soul itself will give the spirit animated power. Those who do not have a soul has an animation by the power of a spirit. And the spiritual energy is that animation. Now, you'll either have a subconscious mind that is programmed to help the spiritual context of your being to be able to progress within its life, or it will be able to have a avatar, and you'll start hearing a lot of people talk about avatars that is able to occupy the body and use that spiritual energy to be able to exist within this realm. And also you'll be able to have an understanding that there are other entities, especially low vibrational dimensional entities that should not be here in this realm. We're going to get into that, are taking an opportunistic advantage of possessing people's bodies, infiltrating people's bodies in order for them to be able to have a presence within this world. And again, we have what they would call 3 different bodies. I mean, again, this is really basic, which is the spiritual, soulful, physical, and it gets into, with these 3 different aspects, and all these different aspects, you can have different things inhabiting these aspects of your body. It's important for us to understand that from the other aspect, and the other aspect in the forgotten works of Enki, it's his story telling us what actually really happened and what went on. So a lot of this work is broken down by Stitchin and a few other different people, and this is the reason why we'll also get into the Emerald Tablets. And the Emerald Tablets are 14 tablets. 2 of them have not been released to the world. And just like with the Hermetica, there's a few pieces of the Hermetica that have never been released to the world because, as they say, it's too dangerous for them to be able to release them. So this is the reason why you have to be extremely well read and be able to look between the lines. So, and then we're going to get into how religion was created. When did it start? Why did it start? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? You know, did it help certain races of this planet to be able to survive? Or was it really meant to entrap them? How was it corrupt? So it's important in all of these works to understand how it's done. And again, the Anunnaki is a major part of all of this, but it's not all of it. All right? It's just a part of a really, really, really huge story. Right? Really huge story. So this is the reason why we do have to talk about Atlantis. We have to talk about what happened before Atlantis. We have to talk about what was going on in Lemuria. We also have to talk about the deep recesses of what's going on inside of this earth, and who really did create the deluge. Did the gods cook up the deluge to kill off mankind? You're going to be very, very, very shocked to find out the truth in that as well, because that's a whole another ball game, which is also in concert with all of this that's going on and everything that's going on today. One of the things that I really want to get into as well is, a lot of these things came from fragmented text. And what fragmented text are we talking about? And these works, a compile of a complete story of the so-called Anunnaki, from those from base came to the earth, right? Impacted on human civilization and the whole entire civilization of this earth. In peacetime and in war, from the fragments scattered throughout the Sumerians, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrians, Hittite, Egyptians. Now, let me just pause there for a minute, because anytime that you're talking about Egypt in any of its forms, you're talking post-Kemet, post-Kem, talking post. Egypt was a name that was put on to Kem from what you would now call the Europeans, to hide the history, the true history of what was going on over there. Because starting really in the 1700s, 1800s, into the 1900s, all the way up until today, they are stealing, deciphering, and dismantling all of the information, all of that ancient information that was meant for us as we're rising out of what we're coming out of, to be able to learn so that we can get back into the soulful beings that we're supposed to be. It's very important to understand that they have severely dismantled a lot of the artifacts that are over there in Kem, what they now call Egypt. They dismantled a lot of what was over there and rebuilt it. When you hear a lot of our scholars talking today, and when I say scholars, our people who are very much endowed in the Hermetics and the Hermetica Kemite type perspective of things, the conscious community, you'll hear them talking about how they had pictures of certain temples, and then back in the 70s and in the 80s, by the time the 80s came around, maybe 11, 12, 13 years later, it was dismantled and totally put back together again. And that is because we're going to get into that as well, why they did that. And what are a lot of the things that in now what you call Egypt, ancient, that they were hiding from ancient Kem. So Egypt is for the people who are now settled there today, which are not the original people of the Kem, of Kemite. They tried to tell you that they are, but they aren't. So let's get that out of the way. Anytime that somebody says Egypt, you're actually talking about the land of Kem or Kemite. And when you look at that, you're looking at what Kem really means, which means people with burnt faces, dark-skinned people, the brown, the darkness and the richness of the earth, of the people that they came from. When you talk about that, because we're talking about Africa, we're talking about so-called Africa, you have to also know that the beings that came there to bring that were directly during the time of the flood. And those people came from another area, which most people are calling from the Americas over here. So we'll get into that as well, because all these things that are dealing with the Egyptian stuff, because they don't know anything. But when you read books from Ningazeta and, or Thoth or Hermes, Mercury's, whatever you want to call them, you'll find out how they actually built the pyramids, who built the pyramids, what's in the pyramids, what the pyramids were actually used for, a lot of the different information that they are not and refusing to tell you today. So more of the information came from the Kemites, but also the Hebrew sources. Now, let's get into the Hebrews. What is, the Hebrews were hijacked so many different times, it is ridiculous, right? Hebrews were hijacked so many different times, it's ridiculous. So the only thing, the original Hebrews, as you'll start to find out in a lot of these different texts, most likely, as they say, came from the Americas. Were brought over there by Thoth, right? Were brought over there by what you can now call Hermes or Nenkazeta. And it's important because these are, again, original beings that have souls that went over there and helped establish Kem, the hairy barbarians that were over there at that particular time. And we hear more about these hairy barbarians in more than one particular place, but this is the reason why the forgotten books of Enki are so important, right? So these sources, so-called myths of all ancient peoples in the old world, they call it the old world, as well as the new world, missing from these accounts, however, was the perspective of the Anunnaki themselves. So you never really hear the perspective of the Anunnaki. And I've always wondered that, right? What did they say about this? Where did they come from? Who are they really? Where did they actually really appear? You know, what planet did they actually really come from? What was it like on their planet, right? Who were these people? As we know now, we know exactly who these people are, and we know exactly what Zachariah Stitcher didn't say in public, but did say to a movie producer who he wanted to produce the movies and who he didn't want to produce the movies. And it's very important that we understand these perspectives and these accounts and exactly who they came from. However, was the perspective of the Anunnaki themselves, what was life like on their own planet? You know, what was their motives propelled them to settle on Earth, or what we now call Earth? And what drove them from their new home? This program, artificial spirits that are among us, right? Artificial people that are among us. We're going to find out a lot of things that we really didn't know. And we'll start with the Lost Book of Enki. We'll also get into the Emerald Tablets, as we said before. And I want you to listen to something as we really get into this, because it's very important for you to have the proper perspective as to where a lot of this stuff is coming from and what the bases are. So this one is coming from, our Anunnakis are African and are the Israelis from this planet. Black History, Aliens, Israeli. It's coming from the theories of entertainment, right? And so he has an author interview. And I just want you to hear his perspective. And this is how, again, this is the reason why you have to really begin to start understanding what you're reading, how you're reading, and you have to have a really good perspective of a lot of the information that you have as we're breaking it down, because a lot of people will have the perspective that, you know, these Anunnaki people are Africans. But when you really get into the story, you begin to start finding out that, first of all, you can't call them, if you call them Africans, you really don't know your history at all, because back then there was no Africa, no name of Africa anyway, and the people that were originally there in Africa were related to what they call hairy barbarians. So listen to this.
The Israelites, and they're actually from this planet. They're not from outer space, but of course, you know, Zachariah Sitchin says that they're from outer space. He's the one that did the Lost Book of Enki, deciphered the Sumerian tablets. But there's this interview with Sophia Stewart. She's the one behind the Matrix and the Terminator, supposedly, but she didn't get credit for it. And she was talking to Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and she said she met Stitchin, and he said that, you know, the aliens were black. I was like, oh yeah, of course. That's what I thought for the longest time, but I don't believe that they're aliens. They're actually from this planet, but they're very advanced. That's why you have their story all throughout the world. Everybody knows their story. And they created Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve is not our beginnings. They are the ones that created Adam and Eve. So that's why they were amazing, and they established empires all over the place. So these people were amazing. But anyway, just listen to the interview.
This is kind of a question I get asked from time to time. They want to know about black aliens. You know, the color of your skin doesn't really matter when you're, a different race of beings, but
oh, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. You see, like, what Carrie Cassidy says? But the thing is that every time they're always talking about blue or white skin aliens. They're always talking about that. But then all of a sudden, you know, it's black. Then it's like, oh, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. It's like, oh, it's hilarious, these people, the games that they play.
Do you want to talk about the various black aliens?
Yeah, I want to tell them something that's very phenomenal. Because remember, you had Clark McCullen on your show one night.
That's
I was listening to that interview. Clark McCullen, the guy from NASA.
That's right.
The guy from NASA. He was talking about the aliens were black. And Stitchin also, I met Stitchin before he passed away. And Stitchin told me that, and there was a witness that introduced me to Stitchin with this guy, Nat Edwards from Indiana, introduced me to Zachariah Stitchin. And Stitchin told me that J.J. Abrams and all the big directors, I mean, he named them all. He said they all came to him trying to get his book. They wanted to do the movie, but they all wanted to make all the aliens and they're white. He said they were black. And he said that he wanted me to do, and when it came time for it to become a movie, he wanted me to do his book and to be the screenwriter. And he called his grandson in and introduced me to his grandson. His grandson's name was Chris. And he told Chris, and this was several years ago before he passed away.
Right.
So for those who want to know, read Zachariah Sitchin's book. They were black aliens, and he didn't want them to be white aliens, and that's why he didn't want J.J. Abrams and all the other ones in Hollywood. They were going to change everything, and that's why he never sold his book for them to adapt to the screen.
So I'm going over this because I want you to understand who these beings are, what they look like. And they have descriptions of them, even descriptions of them of today. And we're going to be playing in this segment the interview that she spoke of a person seeing these aliens getting off a craft and what they look like. And also we're going to be talking about, we're going to be playing a piece of interview from Clark McClellan, who also was a NASA representative and was on the inside, but has been destroyed by MUFON, destroyed by NASA, and destroyed by a lot of other different government agencies, such as Israel. And the man wasn't ever able to make any money off the book that he wrote. So it's a serious business that we're talking about now. And the reason why a lot of scholars are hard-bent not to be able to come out and talk outright truth about all of these things that are going on. So in this series, Counterfeit Spirits Among Us, it's important to understand that the information that you're getting, and a lot of people that are putting out this information are putting it out at their own peril, really, because if you don't support them privately, they can be destroyed completely when they bring a lot of this information out. So it's really, really, really crazy. So I want to get into what this other person has seen coming off spaceships, and I'll show you the video about that.
Okay, but if there are craft, there are beings.
Okay, people have asked me about, I call them vehicles, okay?
Right.
Now, I did not call them objects. That was too neuter for me.
Okay.
I had a Stanford professor said you ought to call them objects. No. They have all of the qualities of a vehicle. They can move. They're just like a missile or anything like that. So that much we can say about them, for sure.
Okay.
So I'm calling them a vehicle.
Okay.
Okay, somebody comes along and says, well, now where would you manufacture one that's 2.5 Earth lengths long? And that's a hard question to answer.
So are you not positing the idea that those vehicles contain, beings who are, maybe like us?
I only go along with government images. And if you want to know about people kind of thing, there is the ship that picked up the Voyager capsule at Alameda Naval Shipyard, and they have a picture there of I think it was the Apollo flight that Bugs and Neil were on. But anyway, there is one image there that shows black people getting off.
So people with dark skin getting off.
Not dark, black.
Black skin.
Really black. Yeah.
Were they tall?
Yes.
Very tall?
Yeah.
How tall? Do you know?
Well, they got out the doorway. I don't know how high that is, but
Well, what?
say 7 feet would be probably a conservative estimate.
Have you heard about Clark McClellan's statement about that?
No,
Oh, you haven't?
no,
Have you ever been in touch with him?
no.
No?
There is one image there that shows black people getting off.
So people with dark skin getting off,
Not dark, black,
black skin,
really black. Yeah,
were they tall?
yes.
Very tall?
Yeah.
How tall? Do you know?
Well, they got out the doorway. I don't know how high that is, but
Well, what?
say 7 feet would be probably a conservative estimate. That was too new for me.
Okay.
I had a Stanford professor say, you ought to call them Aboriginal. No. They have all of the qualities of a vehicle. They can move. They're just like a missile or anything like that. So that much we can say about them, for sure.
Okay.
So I'm calling them in.
Okay.
Okay, somebody comes along and says, well, now where would you manufacture one that's 2.5 Earth lengths long? And that's a hard question to answer.
So are you not positing the idea that those vehicles contain, beings who are, maybe like us?
I only go along with government images. And if you want to know about people kind of thing, there is the ship that picked up the Voyager capsule at Alameda Naval Shipyard, and they have a picture there of I think it's the Apollo flight that Bugs and Neil were on. But anyway, there is one image there that shows black people getting off.
So people with dark skin getting off,
Not dark, black,
black skin,
really black. Yeah,
were they tall?
yes.
Very tall?
Yeah.
How tall? Do you know?
Well, they got out the doorway. I don't know how high that is, but
Well, what?
say 7 feet would be probably a conservative estimate.
Have you heard about Clark McClellan's statement about that?
No,
Oh, you haven't? Have you ever been in touch with him?
no.
No?
There is one image there that shows black people getting off.
So people with dark skin getting off,
Not dark, black,
black skin,
really black. Yeah,
were they tall?
yes.
Very tall?
Yeah.
How tall?
So as we get into this, I just want to let you know, what people are actually seeing out there, the descriptions, so then that way, you don't think this is just erroneous information just given you, right? So I want you to hear it from the professionals as to what some of these beings actually really look like. And as you're listening to this program, I'm going to be showing you pictures. You can see all the pictures up there of the different artifacts of what these kinds of beings actually look like as well, and the original beings, because a lot of people don't know who they are, don't know where they come from, don't know what happened in history, and they aren't getting the truth. So these programs I'm going to have, it might be a series of God only knows how long. We're going to flesh it out really well, and we're going to show you, just like with this program right now showing you. You can see that there is a lot of reports that these aliens, or whatever you want to call them, are of dark skin, just like the ones in I have to go back to I believe it was 1943 in Roswell. The first reported aliens that weren't grays; they were brown skin. They were brown skin, short little beings, about 3 feet tall, right? So there's another guy in Puerto Rico who said that when he was abducted and he was taken onto a ship, that the people had dark skin, but they weren't Negroid. They always come back and saying things like that. And then there are interviews on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie with people describing their experiences and how they were talking about old ancient African history, verbal history, as to where their people actually came from Mars, settled here on Earth to dig gold. So that makes you automatically think of some of the things we're going to be talking about, such as the Ijiji, who were actually on Mars from what you would call the Anunnaki, and those people up there. So we have to get into all these different aspects as to who the Anunnaki are, who are the Ijiji, who are the people from Nerubu and the Nairobian people. It sounds, so close to certain ancient African contacts and some contacts that are here in the North American or the Americas, as well as Antarctica and up here in the North Pole, etc. But so we're going to get into a lot of people, all these things that are going on surrounding the creation of man, or the creation of beings, and it is going to be very fascinating. So that's how I wanted to really end this one off, because I wanted just to show you the context of people, what things really look like, because you're always seeing it from a specific point of view from specific entities and agencies such as MUFON.